This is Delhi Law Academy's series of lectures on the Constitution of India. In this lecture, we will be studying the provisions of Articles 52 to 75 contained in Part 5 of the Constitution. These provisions relate to the President, the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. And we will try to explain these provisions in question-answer form. This is the first question, which deals with the President of India. The question is, who elects the President of India? This is the answer. The President of India is elected by elected members of both houses of Parliament and elected members of state legislative assemblies including Delhi and Puducherry. One point which needs to be carefully noted here is that in the election for the President of India, only the elected members will be taking part and not the nominated members. The Rajya Sabha has 12 nominated members. They will not be participating in the election. Only the elected members of both houses. Secondly, the other point which needs to be noted is that we are talking of elected members of state legislative assemblies. Delhi and Puducherry are not states as such, yet the legislative assemblies of these union territories will also be taking part in the election for the President of India. Question number 2. What weight does the vote of an MLA of a state carry? When the MLA of a state, the member of Legislative Assembly of a state, casts his vote in the election of the President, the value of his vote is not 1 as is normally the case. This value is much larger than 1. How is this value to be computed? A formula is given in Article 55 of the Constitution, and according to this, an MLA of a state has a number of votes, and this number equals the population of the state divided by the total number of elected MLAs in that state, further divided by 1000. When we are talking of population of the state, it is not the current population, it is not the population of the last census, rather it is the population which was determined by the 1971 census. So that one point needs to be remembered. The population here is the 1971 census population. And again, we are talking only of the elected MLAs in that state. एक MLA के वोट की कीमत एक नहीं होती है, अनेक होती है, और वो नंबर आर्टिकल 55 के फॉर्मूला के हिसाब से निकाला जाता है, और वो फॉर्मूला है पॉपुलेशन ऑफ द स्टेट divided by the total number of elected MLAs in that state and further divided by 1000. Similarly, the next question deals with the number of votes of a member of parliament. In the election of the President of India, when an MP casts his vote, the value of this vote is not 1, and how that value is to be computed, again it is to be computed through a formula which is given in Article 55, and this is the answer. The number of votes of an MP equals the total number of votes of all MLAs of all states divided by the total number of elected MPs. And इस तरह से अगर हम निकालेंगे तो we find a situation where the total number of votes of all MLAs of all states put together on one side will be equal to the total number of votes of all elected members of parliament. And therefore, in the election of the president, सारे states के MLAs का वोट एक तरफ और पार्लियामेंट के सारे मेंबर्स का वोट एक तरफ, और वो एग्जैक्टली इक्वल आता है, which shows that The president actually represents all the states and all the members of parliament. And this representation is equal. Next question. Who decides disputes relating to the election of president? The answer is simple. As per Article 79, Article 71, disputes relating to the election of the president shall be inquired into and decided by the Supreme Court. Next question. How many times can a president be re-elected? The answer is a president in India can be re-elected any number of times. As far as the constitution is concerned, Article 57 lays no limit and it says that a president can get re-elected any number of times. However, practically, अब तक जितने elections हुए, जितने president हुए, there is only one occasion जहाँ पे president का re-election हुआ. In all other cases, a president has completed only one term and none of them has been re-elected. The first president of India, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, happens to be the only president who was re-elected in the year 1957. What are the qualifications for a person to contest the election of the president? Qualifications for contesting the elections of the president are given in Article 58. These are the four qualifications, four requirements before a person can contest the election for the president of India. Firstly, he should be a citizen of India. Secondly, he should be at least 35 years of age. Next, he should be qualified to be elected to the Lok Sabha. The point to be noted here is that the requirement is that the contestant should be qualified to be elected to the Lok Sabha. He need not actually be a member of Lok Sabha. लोक सभा का इलेक्शन लड़ने के लिए जो क्वालिफिकेशन होनी चाहिए वो इस कंटेस्टेंट में होनी चाहिए. ये रिक्वायरमेंट नहीं है कि वो लोकसभा का एक्चुअली मेंबर होना चाहिए. And the fourth requirement is that he should not hold any office of profit under government or any authority under government control. So a government employee cannot contest the election of the president until and unless he resigns from his post. The office of the President of India, the Vice President of India, etc. are also offices of profit. So the question is whether a person who is holding the office of the President, can he contest the election without resigning from his office? And the answer to this question will be clear from this next slide. Which offices are excluded from the ambit of the term office of profit? Actually, there are certain offices which are actually offices of profit. However, these offices are excluded from the ambit of this term as far as election to the office of the president is concerned. And what are these offices? Which are these offices? These offices are mentioned in the constitution itself, and the answer is this. The following offices are not considered as office of profit: the office of the president, vice president, governor, union minister, and minister of a state. All these offices, though actually these are offices of profit, yet they will not be so considered for the election of the president, which means that a union minister can contest the election of the president without resigning. A sitting president can contest the election of the president without resigning. However, an employee of the government, a clerk, an officer, even a peon, he cannot contest the election until and unless he resigns from his post. Next question. Which constitutional authority has been entrusted with the onerous task of protecting and defending the Constitution? In other words, who is the protector and defender of the Constitution? Many people answer this question by saying that it is the Supreme Court of India which protects and defends the Constitution. However, if you have a look at the provisions of the Constitution itself, we find a different answer, and the answer to this question is available in Article 60 of the Constitution. Article 60 deals with oath of office to the President, and the content of the oath prescribed in Article 60 shows that it is the President who takes oath to protect and defend the Constitution. The Supreme Court of India judges, when they take oath, the oath is not for protection and defense of the Constitution, but when the President takes oath, he undertakes to protect and defend the Constitution, and therefore it can be clearly said that it is the President who is the protector and defender of the Constitution. In which constitutional authority is the executive power of the Union vested, and how is it to be exercised? Executive power of the Union is vested in which authority? And the answer is the President. Executive power of the Union is vested in the President of India, and he shall exercise this power. How he will exercise? He shall exercise this power either directly or through subordinate officers. And secondly, he shall exercise this power in accordance with this Constitution. The President of India has been vested with the entire executive power of the Union, but he cannot exercise it the way he likes. He has to exercise this power in accordance with this Constitution. This provision, which is contained in Article 53 itself, indicates that there will be some provision in the Constitution which will guide the President in the exercise of his power. What is that provision? We will shortly see. Next question. What matters are included in the executive power of the Union? In the preceding question, we talked about the executive power of the Union having been vested in the President of India. Executive power प्रेसिडेंट में निहित है, लेकिन ये एग्जीक्यूटिव पावर है क्या? व्हाट इज मेंट बाय द एग्जीक्यूटिव पावर ऑफ द यूनियन? तभी तो हम समझ पाएंगे कि प्रेसिडेंट के पास क्या पावर है. तो इसका आंसर आर्टिकल 73 में है. मैटर्स इंक्लूडेड इन द एग्जीक्यूटिव पावर ऑफ द यूनियन. 3 तरह के मैटर्स हैं जो एग्जीक्यूटिव पावर ऑफ द यूनियन में इंक्लूड होते हैं. द first category of matters is matters enumerated in the union list. 7 शेड्यूल में 3 लिस्ट हैं, उनमें से पहली लिस्ट है यूनियन लिस्ट. यूनियन लिस्ट में जितने भी मैटर्स लिस्टेड हैं वो सब एग्जीक्यूटिव पावर ऑफ द यूनियन में आते हैं. To begin with, this list had 97 entries. Then there have been deletions, there have been additions, and the net result as of now is 98 entries. So all matters listed in this list, that is all these 98 matters, fall within the executive power of the union. Next we come to the concurrent list. Concurrent list में जितने matters हैं, mostly they fall in the executive power of the state, but some of these matters which are expressly included by the constitution or by the parliament in the executive power of the union, those matters alone will fall in the executive power of the union. तो अगर स्पेसिफिकली किसी मैटर को, कॉन्करेंट लिस्ट वाले मैटर को एग्जीक्यूटिव पावर ऑफ द यूनियन में शामिल किया गया है बाय द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन और बाय द पार्लियामेंट, तब तो वो एग्जीक्यूटिव पावर ऑफ द यूनियन में आएगा. अगर स्पेसिफिकली नहीं किया गया है तो बाय डिफॉल्ट दैट मैटर will fall in the executive power of the state. And the third category is rights and authority by virtue of any treaty or agreement with other countries. दूसरे कंट्रीज के साथ कोई भी ट्रीटी, कोई भी एग्रीमेंट है, उससे रिलेटेड कोई भी मैटर है तो वो एग्जीक्यूटिव पावर ऑफ द यूनियन में ही इंक्लूड होगा. These are the 3 categories or 3 groups of matters which fall within the executive power of the union. Next question. How shall the President exercise his powers? We have so far seen that the entire executive power of the Union rests in the President. We have also seen what is meant by the executive power, those three groups of matters which fall in the executive power of the Union. Now we will see how this power is to be exercised by the President. As we saw earlier, Article 53 itself said that the President shall exercise his power in accordance with this Constitution. And at that time we spoke that there must be some provision in the Constitution which guides the President in the exercise of his powers, and now we come to that provision. This provision is contained in Article 74 of the Constitution, and the provision says that the President shall exercise his powers with the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers with the Prime Minister at the head. He shall act in accordance with such advice. This provision makes it very clear that the President is bound by the advice given by the Council of Ministers, and he will exercise his powers only with the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers and not in his discretion. However, the President may return the advice for reconsideration once, but the subsequent advice is binding. इस प्रोविजन में 2 बार अमेंडमेंट हुआ है आर्टिकल 74 में. 42nd अमेंडमेंट से इट वाज मेड the advice of the Council of Ministers was made binding on the President, though conventionally it was binding even earlier, but now it has been incorporated in the Constitution itself. And secondly, 78th amendment में President was given one chance of sending the advice back for reconsideration to the Council of Ministers, और अगर Council of Ministers से advice दोबारा आती है then he is bound by it. So once we are on the Council of Ministers, the next question is, who can be appointed a minister in the Union Council of Ministers? The Council of Ministers comprises of what? Answer: any person who has not been disqualified as a member of Parliament under the 10th schedule can be appointed a minister. In fact, in Article 75 of the Constitution, there is no qualification specified for a member of Parliament for a person to be appointed a minister in the Union Council of Ministers. उसमें एक disqualification दी हुई है कि anybody who has been disqualified under the 10th schedule, he cannot be appointed a minister. और दूसरी एक कंडीशन ये है कि मिनिस्टर अपॉइंट तो कोई भी हो सकता है, लेकिन वो सिर्फ 6 महीने तक ही मिनिस्टर रह सकता है अगर इस बीच वो मेंबर ऑफ पार्लियामेंट नहीं बनता है तो. सो द सेकंड प्रोविजन इज he shall cease to be a minister. Anybody can be appointed provided he is not disqualified. So the first thing is this: anybody can be appointed a minister. He need not be a member of Parliament at the time when he is appointed. The only requirement at the time of appointment is that he should not have been disqualified as a member of Parliament under the 10th schedule. But once he is appointed a minister, then the second requirement comes into play, and the second requirement is that he must become a member of Parliament within the period of 6 months. If he fails to become a member of Parliament within the period of 6 months, then he ceases to be a minister. Next, what is the maximum number of ministers in the Union Council of Ministers? Article 75 prescribes this number, and this number is 15% of the total members of Lok Sabha. So the maximum strength of the Union Council of Ministers, including the Prime Ministers, is 15% of the total members of Lok Sabha. Question 14. What authority can remove the Union Council of Ministers and how? The answer: the Union Council of Ministers can be removed by the House of People, by the Lok Sabha. And how? By passing a no confidence motion against the council. Here one point needs to be noted. अगर एक individual minister को हटाना है, if an individual minister is to be removed, then he can be removed by the President of India on the advice of the Prime Minister. But if the entire Council of Ministers, including the Prime Minister, is to be removed, then the power lies with the House of People, and the House of People can do so by passing a no confidence motion against the entire Council of Ministers. That is why we say that the Union Council of Ministers is responsible to the Lok Sabha, and it is collectively responsible because the whole of the Council of Ministers can be removed by the House of People in one go by passing this motion. So the next question is, what is meant by the collective responsibility of the Union Council of Ministers to the Lok Sabha? The Union Council of Ministers is collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha. What it means is that the Council of Ministers as a whole can be removed by the House of People by passing a no confidence motion. This provision is also contained in Article 75, Clause 3 of the Constitution. Next question. In what cases can the President grant pardon? The President of India has been given this special power of granting pardon. This power is available under Article 72 of the Constitution, and we will study this power through different questions. The first question is, in what cases this power of granting pardon is available? And the answer is this. The President can grant pardon to any person who is convicted. So first thing to be noted is that this power comes into play once the person is convicted. While the case is under trial and the conviction has not yet been made, then this power cannot be exercised. The power of granting pardon by the President can be exercised only once conviction has taken place, the court has given its decision and the person has been found to be guilty. So a person who is convicted by a court martial can be granted pardon. Secondly, a person convicted of any offence against a law on a matter within the executive power of the Union, he can also be granted pardon. And thirdly, any person who is sentenced to a sentence of death can also be granted pardon by the President. Convicted by a court martial means a court which is established under the Armed Forces Acts. We have different acts for the different wings of our defense forces. There is an Army Act, Air Force Act, and the Navy Act, and courts are established under these acts. Any conviction by a court martial will be covered under Article 72 and it will fall under the pardoning power of the President. So these are the three categories of persons who can be pardoned. A person convicted by a court martial, a person convicted of any offence against a law on a matter within the executive power of the Union, and a person sentenced to death. Now, next question is, what is the effect of a presidential pardon? Now, the pardon comes into play when the court has already convicted that person and he has been found guilty by a court of law. So, when we say that person has been pardoned, what is the effect of this pardon? The grant of pardon wipes off the guilt of the convict and brings him to the original position of innocence as if he had never committed the offence for which he was convicted. So he gets a clean slate. The offence is completely wiped off and the pardon brings him to the original position of innocence. This is important to note. The pardon brings him to the original position of innocence as if he had never committed the offence. So the grant of pardon affects both the punishment which is prescribed for the offence and also the guilt of the offender. Next question. Can the power under Article 72 be exercised by the President on his own, or has it to be exercised on the advice of the central government? Power under Article 72 is the pardoning power which we are discussing now. The question is whether this power which is available to the President has to be exercised by the President on the advice of the Council of Ministers, or he can exercise in his discretion on his own. And the answer is available in a Supreme Court decision. A constitutional bench of the Supreme Court held in Maru Ram versus Union of India that the power under Article 72 is to be exercised by the President on the advice of the central government and not on his own, and that the advice of the government binds the head of the Republic. The President is the head of the Republic, but he is bound by the advice, and this binding nature of the advice now is very specifically provided in Article 74 itself, which says that the President shall act according to the advice given by the Council of Ministers. Next question. Can there be a judicial review of the clemency power of the President? Now, one thing we have already seen, that the President is bound by the advice of the Council of Ministers when he is dealing with Article 72, when he is exercising a power given by Article 72. Next, the question before us now is whether the constitutional courts, that is the High Court and the Supreme Court, can they interfere in this exercise of the pardoning power or the clemency power of the President? Is there any scope of judicial review of the decision of the President as regards clemency or pardon given to a convict or not given? Of course, the President will exercise his powers only on the advice of the Council of Ministers, but do the constitutional courts also have a power to interfere in this exercise of power? The answer given by the Supreme Court is this: a limited judicial review of the exercise of clemency power is available to the Supreme Court and the High Courts. A limited judicial review of the exercise of clemency power or pardoning power is available to the Supreme Court and High Courts, only the constitutional courts. And this proposition of law was laid down by the Supreme Court in this case, Epuru Sudhakar versus Government of Andhra Pradesh. So yes, now the current legal position is that a judicial review is possible or available. Next question. What are the grounds on which clemency power can be challenged? Once we say that judicial review is possible, once we say that judicial review is permissible, then we also need to know what are the grounds on which such judicial review can be made. And these are the grounds. Granting of clemency by the President can be challenged in the High Court and Supreme Court on the following grounds. These are the 5 grounds. Number 1, it can be challenged if that order has been passed without application of mind. The order can be giving clemency or refusing clemency. If the order has been passed without application of mind, the constitutional courts can set aside such an order. If the order is nullified, second point. Third, if the order has been passed on extraneous or wholly irrelevant considerations. Fourth, where the relevant material has been kept out of consideration while arriving at the decision. And fifth, where the order suffers from arbitrariness. If it is an arbitrary order, it can be struck down by the High Court or the Supreme Court. Similarly, relevant material must have been considered, irrelevant material must not have been considered, the order should not be nullified, and the order must be passed with application of mind. These are the requirements. Next, we come to the question of impeachment of the President. We have seen how he is elected. We have seen what powers are vested in him. We have seen how he exercises these powers. And now is the time to understand how the President can be removed from his office. The removal of the President from his office is constitutionally known as impeachment of the President. So what is the procedure? The procedure is detailed in Article 61 of the Constitution, and this is in two stages. Stage 1 is known as preferring of the charge. The charge can be preferred by either House of Parliament. We should be clear, as far as the ground of impeachment is, there is only one ground, and that is violation of the Constitution. So if there is a charge of violation of Constitution on the President, such a charge can be preferred against him, leveled against him by either House of Parliament. The only requirement is that a 14 days prior notice signed by at least 1/4 members of that house has to be given. Once that prior notice is given, then this charge can be discussed in the house and the charge will stand preferred once a resolution is passed by that house with a special majority. And what is the special majority? The special majority is of not less than 2/3 of its total membership. So at least 2/3 of the total membership of that house must vote in favor of referring the charge. Then only the charge can be preferred. It is immaterial as to how many members were actually present at the time when the resolution was voted and how many members voted in favor of the resolution preferring the charge. The majority does not concern itself with the number of members present and voting. The majority concerns itself with the total membership of the House. For example, the total membership of the Lok Sabha is 545. So if a charge is being preferred against the President of India for his impeachment in Lok Sabha, then at least 2/3 of 545 members must vote in favor of the charge. Then only that resolution will be treated to having been passed. Then comes the second step, and that is investigation of the charge. The charge which was preferred by the first house will now be investigated by the second house, and this house will be known as the investigating house. After the investigation, if this second house also passes a resolution by the same special majority, what is the special majority? Not less than 2/3 of the total membership of the second house. If the second house passes a resolution by this special majority sustaining the charge, then the President shall stand removed. Next question. Who discharges the function of the President when there are vacancies in the office of both the President and the Vice President? Now we are aware that when the office of the President is vacant, or if the President is unable to discharge his functions, then it is the Vice President who steps in and he will act as the President, or he will discharge the functions of the President. Now we are talking of a situation where the office of the President is vacant and also the office of the Vice President is vacant. Who will exercise the powers of the President and who will discharge the functions of the President in such a situation? In fact, this situation had arisen once in the year 1969 when the then sitting President, Dr. Zakir Hussain, had expired, and when election to the office of the President was about to take place, then the Vice President wanted to contest the election, and for the purpose of contesting the election, he also resigned. So at that point of time, the President's office was vacant because the sitting President had expired, and the Vice President's office became vacant because the sitting Vice President resigned to contest the election of the President. So who should discharge the functions of the President in such a situation? This is the question, and the answer is available in Article 70 and a law passed under that article. The Parliament has been empowered by Article 70 of the Constitution to pass a law taking care of such a contingency, and in exercise of this power, given to the Parliament under Article 70 of the Constitution. The Parliament actually enacted the President Discharge of Functions Act in 1969 for this contingency. What is the contingency? When the office of the President is vacant and the office of the Vice President is also vacant. And what is the provision contained in this enactment? This act provides as under: in the event of the occurrence of vacancies in the offices of both the President and the Vice President, the Chief Justice of India, or in his absence, the senior-most judge of the Supreme Court available, shall discharge the functions of the President. कब तक? Until a new President enters upon his office or a new Vice President begins to act as President under Article 65, whichever is earlier. पहले चाहे प्रेसिडेंट अवेलेबल हो जाए चाहे वाइस प्रेसिडेंट अवेलेबल हो जाए, जैसे ही इन दोनों में से कोई सा भी अवेलेबल होगा तो द चीफ जस्टिस या जो भी सीनियर मोस्ट जज ऑफ द सुप्रीम कोर्ट हु वाज डिस्चार्जिंग द फंक्शंस ऑफ द प्रेसिडेंट, ही विल रेमिट हिज ऑफिस and the president or the vice president, as the case may be, will take over. So this law was enacted under Article 70 and this law takes care of this contingency. Next question. State with reasons whether it is essential to have a council of ministers under Article 74(1) even at a time when the House of the People has been dissolved or its term has expired. Now this is a long answer question क्योंकि इसमें reasons भी पूछे और question yes or no में तो देना ही देना है. The question is this: when the House of People is dissolved or its term has expired, उस समय भी क्या Council of Ministers का होना जरूरी है? This question becomes relevant because जैसा हमने पहले देखा, the Council of Ministers is collectively responsible to the लोक सभा. अगर लोक सभा एग्जिस्टेंस में नहीं है तो Council of Ministers किसके प्रति रिस्पॉन्सिबल होगी? There is no one to whom the Council of Responsible can be. The Council of Ministers can be responsible. तो ऐसी सिचुएशन में जब Council of Minister किसी के प्रति रिस्पॉन्सिबल है ही नहीं क्योंकि लोक सभा तो है ही नहीं, तो क्या प्रेसिडेंट स्टिल बाउंड होगा कि काउंसिल ऑफ मिनिस्टर्स की एडवाइस से वो चले? दिस इज द क्वेश्चन एंड इसके रीजंस भी देने हैं. सो लेट अस सी. एज फार एज द आंसर, स्ट्रेट आंसर इज कंसर्न, आंसर इज यस, एंड द रीजंस आर गिवन बाय द सुप्रीम कोर्ट in UNR Rao versus Indira Gandhi, decided in 1971. This question was raised in this case and the Supreme Court has given the following answer. Let us see. What are the reasons? The Supreme Court says that Article 75 Clause 3, Article 75 Clause 3 वो एक आर्टिकल है जो कलेक्टिव रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी की बात करता है. This clause says that the Council of Ministers is collectively responsible to the House of People, collectively responsible to the Lok Sabha. तो अब कोर्ट का ये कहना है, Article 75 Clause 3 brings into existence what is usually called responsible government. इसलिए इसको रिस्पॉन्सिबल गवर्नमेंट कहते हैं क्योंकि जो भी गवर्नमेंट है, जो भी काउंसिल ऑफ मिनिस्टर्स है, वो लोकसभा के प्रति रिस्पॉन्सिबल है और लोकसभा लोगों को रिप्रेजेंट करती है, पीपल ऑफ इंडिया को रिप्रेजेंट करती है, इसलिए ये रिस्पॉन्सिबल गवर्नमेंट मानी जाती है. द काउंसिल ऑफ मिनिस्टर्स मस्ट एंजॉय द कॉन्फिडेंस ऑफ द हाउस ऑफ पीपल. While the House of People is not dissolved, Article 75(3) has full operation. But when it is dissolved, the Council of Ministers cannot naturally enjoy the confidence of the House of People. जब House of People है ही नहीं तो उसका confidence enjoy करने की बात भी नहीं रहती है. So at the time when the House of People is not in existence, the Council of Ministers is not responsible to anybody at that point of time. So that is one situation. On the other hand, Article 74(1) is mandatory and therefore the President cannot exercise the executive power without the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. ये अभी हमने पहले भी देखा था। आर्टिकल 74 obliges the president to exercise his powers only on the aid and advice of the council of ministers। तो अगर प्रेसिडेंट बिना एडवाइस के कोई अपनी पावर को एक्सरसाइज ही नहीं कर सकता तो फिर काम रुक जाएगा, अगर काउंसिल ऑफ मिनिस्टर्स नहीं होगी तो एक तरफ आर्टिकल 74 क्लॉज 1 है, दूसरी तरफ आर्टिकल 75 क्लॉज 3 है। आर्टिकल 74 और आर्टिकल 75 दोनों में एक तरह से कॉन्ट्रडिक्शन है, तो इनको हार्मोनाइज करना पड़ेगा, इनको रिकॉन्साइल करना पड़ेगा। The court says we must harmonize the provisions of Article 75(3) with Article 74(1) and इस harmonization का रिजल्ट उन्होंने ये बताया है कि in the context therefore Article 75(3) only applies when the House of People does not stand dissolved or prorogued. However, the Council of Ministers will continue to be there and the President will continue to be bound with the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers, even though they are not responsible at that stage to anybody, in the sense that the House of People is not in existence. The last question in today's class is this: state with reasons whether a person who is not a member of either House of Parliament can be appointed as the Prime Minister of India. Article 75 of the Constitution talks about the appointment of the Prime Minister and the appointment of the other ministers. Article 75 में कोई क्वालिफिकेशंस नहीं है कि किसको प्राइम मिनिस्टर बनाया जाना चाहिए। हालांकि ये जरूर लिखा है कि बाकी मिनिस्टर्स को बनाने के लिए प्राइम मिनिस्टर की एडवाइस होनी चाहिए, बट एज फार एज द अपॉइंटमेंट ऑफ द प्राइम मिनिस्टर हिमसेल्फ इज कंसर्न्ड, नथिंग हैज बीन सेड एज टू हु कैन बी अपॉइंटेड ए प्राइम मिनिस्टर। तो क्वेश्चन ये है कि क्या कोई ऐसा पर्सन प्राइम मिनिस्टर अपॉइंट किया जा सकता है जो कि किसी भी हाउस का मेंबर नहीं है? एंड इट्स अगेन ए लॉन्ग आंसर क्वेश्चन, क्योंकि इसमें रीजंस भी हमको स्टेट करने हैं। As far as the answer is concerned, it is yes, which means that a person who is not a member of either House of Parliament can be appointed the Prime Minister. मिनिस्टर भी अपॉइंट किया जा सकता है, प्राइम मिनिस्टर भी अपॉइंट किया जा सकता है। अपॉइंटमेंट के टाइम मेंबर ऑफ पार्लियामेंट होना जरूरी नहीं है। हालांकि वो प्रोविजन निश्चित रूप से यहाँ भी लागू होता है जो कहता है कि विद इन 6 months that person, whether is a minister, whether is a prime minister, he has to become a member of parliament. लेकिन वो 6 months के बाद की बात है। At the time of the appointment, there is no requirement of being a member of parliament. तो इसके जो रीजंस हैं वो सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने दिए थे। SP आनंद वर्सेस HD देवेगौड़ा in the year 1997. You will recall that 1996 में एक सिचुएशन हुई थी जब HD देवेगौड़ा became the Prime Minister of India. He was appointed the Prime Minister, and at the time when he was appointed the Prime Minister, he was not a member of either House of Parliament. He was simply a member of the Legislative Assembly of Karnataka. तो ये अपॉइंटमेंट चैलेंज किया गया और उस चैलेंज का आंसर सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने इस केस में दिया है। द आंसर इज यस, एंड नाउ वी विल सी द रीजंस। These are the reasons. On a plain reading of Article 75(5), it is obvious that the Constitution makers desired to permit a person who was not a member of either House of Parliament to be appointed a minister. Article 75 Clause 5 में ये कहा हुआ है कि अगर कोई मिनिस्टर है और वो 6 महीने तक either House of Parliament का मेंबर नहीं बनता है तो he will cease to be a minister. तो उसको इंटरप्रेट करते हुए सुप्रीम कोर्ट सेज कि दिस आर्टिकल शोज दैट द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन मेकर्स डिजायर्ड टू परमिट ए पर्सन हु वाज नॉट ए मेंबर ऑफ आइदर हाउस ऑफ पार्लियामेंट टू बी अपॉइंटेड ए मिनिस्टर। यस, एंड द पर्सन हु इज अपॉइंटेड द प्राइम मिनिस्टर इज चोजन बाय द इलेक्टेड रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स ऑफ द पीपल, यानी लोकसभा में जो मेंबर्स हैं वो ही उसको चूज कर रहे हैं, एंड he can occupy the position only if he enjoys the confidence of the majority of the elected representatives in the Lok Sabha. Article 75 Clause 3 के अनुसार he can continue in office only as long as he enjoys the confidence of the Lok Sabha, which means the confidence of the majority of the elected representatives who are the members of the Lok Sabha. So even when a Prime Minister is not a member of either House of Parliament, once he is so appointed, he becomes answerable to the House, and so also his ministers. He becomes answerable to the House, and his ministers also become answerable to the House, and the principle of collective responsibility governs the democratic process. And on these reasons, the Supreme Court gave the answer that yes, a person who is not a member of either House of Parliament can be appointed the Prime Minister of India.